Welcome into episode 18 of the Godly Young Men podcast. Today we are discussing how to lead a family, and I realize that, we're talking to people that may be 15, 16, 17 years old, and you go, man, a family's so far off.
Right. We may have a few that are already married and have families,
very true,
which is great.
Very true, and I hope so, yeah. I appreciate you listening. If that is the case, if you are leading a family currently, and good for you. I think that's fantastic. But we may have some that say, I'm not there yet. Please listen. We got some things at the end that I think are going to tie this in as to why this is important, but there's never really a too early a time to start, in my opinion. We have to start thinking about these things, because if we think that we're going to wake up one day and be ready, just out of the blue, probably not.
Especially for young men. It's such a big deal that young men know how to lead a family, and why there is such a heavy, I don't like the word burden, but in a lot of ways it is a burden. I'm going to call it a responsibility that rests on your shoulders as a young man for your family. It's not one of those things where it's like it's all a team effort and everybody has an equal share. That's not the case. That's not the way God laid it out. You as the man, you as the husband, as the father, you have so much sway, so much control, so much rests on your shoulders about the direction of your family. And so that's why we wanted to have this episode about how do you lead your family, and then maybe secondarily, we're going to have some other episodes after this about how do you prepare to lead your family? What does being a good dad look like, maybe for somebody who is not there yet? What does being a good husband look like for somebody who's not there yet? So I didn't want to overstep any bounds there, but I think that is what we're going to direct the next few episodes to, with this one being a little bit more overarching.
There's a great quote. I don't know who said it, but I've heard it before. And the idea is authority flows to those who take responsibility. And that's really what this is going to be about. This episode arc is, are you taking responsibility for your family? God has asked you to take responsibility for your kids, and most certainly for your wife and for yourself. And are you taking responsibility? And as we consider how to lead a family, that's what it comes down to is, are we willing to take responsibility? Because we will have, in my opinion, very little authority if we just want to pass it off. Well, that's my wife's problem. That's my kid's problem. That's whatever else is. The buck ultimately stops with you. That's what God designed it as, and that's a really good thing. Responsibility is fantastic, and it's something that God designed for a reason.
I was just going to say, it's such human nature to want to push aside the responsibility and push the blame or push the whatever off to somebody else, right?
Right.
We're not I don't want to speak for you. Youth ministry can be great in some instances and really bad in a lot of cases.
True.
A lot of people like to push off the parental responsibility on the youth minister or on the elders or on the preacher or on the public school teacher or on the fill in the blank. You are responsible. You cannot be the person that, like you said, shirks their duty to their wife and says, you handle this, I'm going to go work at my job, you handle the raising of the kids. Can't be that. There's a lot on your shoulders, and you have to be ready and willing to take up that gauntlet. Because
what do you do when you get to heaven and, you're standing in front of God and he says, man, your household was a wreck.
Yeah.
Your kids walked away. You just never, you didn't set them up well for life. You didn't instill a deep love for me in your children. You go, my wife's the one that was home all day.
Right.
Like,
talk to her. I
was working a job. What do you want from me? Like, God's going to look at you and go, I gave it to you. And if your wife isn't leading them at home, guess who that falls to? You. Talk to your wife. Call her out. A lot of people are too afraid of the confrontation, afraid of getting put in the doghouse, whatever. That's not really what this is about fully. We're going to get into that more in the marriage episode as to why that's a horrible thing. What we really wanted to cover in this episode was the different domains of life that you must take responsibility in, that you must lead your family in. And the way I look at it...
I was going to say, go for it. Before you do that, I want to talk about what culture views a father and a husband's role as. Like, how does culture, like when the average person thinks about leading a family, what do they think of? They don't think about all the things you're about to go through, which is what we want to talk about mainly. What do they think about? Man, make sure you got a roof over their head. Make sure you got a good job, that you're providing for them, so that
food on the table
so that they can play their sports and go to their extracurricular activities, and that's really the main thing. Yeah. Then you have the next level, which is you do all those things, and then you support your kids at their events, right? You're the really good dad who goes to the soccer games and goes to the school plays, and man, you're there for your kids. You support them really well. And then you got the third tier, the really, really good dads who do all of those things, and then, they're really involved in their kids' life as far as school and church and things like that.
Yeah, get them to church,
Right, get them to church. Man, you're a great dad if you can make sure your kids are somewhat well-adjusted and that they show up to church maybe.
That's right.
That's pretty much it, right? It's very, we've talked before about how culture paints dads, the light they paint them in as far as the shows, and how they're always kind of the bumbling idiots and the goofballs, and that's obviously not a good thing at all. But even with this idea of how to lead a family, culture paints it in a very different light than all the things you're about to go through.
And we're calling you to so much more.
Yes.
We are calling you to that.
Strive for greatness.
That's right. Strive for greatness. And it's not enough to just get your kids to church every once in a while. It's not enough to just show up to their sporting events. We have to lead them in multiple ways. And this gets into the domains of life that I think really this encompasses pretty much everything. Physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. You can think of it as PIES, P-I-E-S. Physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual is how we ought to be leading. These are the areas we must take responsibility in for our families. And so we want to jump right into the physical. And when you're considering, what do you mean, Joe? What are you talking about with
how do you lead your family
how do you lead your family physically? I understand the spiritual. Yeah, let's just skip to that part. When we're talking leading your family physically, this may be hard to say. People may bristle at this. Hard to hear. People may, bristle at this. You have a duty and a responsibility to help your family be healthy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You see the families where the dad is 350, 400 pounds. His kids, he has not set the tone in the home that we're going to be healthy people. I think that's an imperative. I think as a dad, you say, man, how can you say that? That seems like extra,
That's optional.
Yeah, that's optional. Where do you find that in Scripture? We're to help raise our kids unto the Lord, and I would say gluttony and self-control and the things that go along with that. I think we have a duty to help them physically be the best that they can be, and to not hinder them, to not hold them back, because you know what? Their prospects in life change for marital partners, their prospects in job, their prospects in health going forward.
Quality
I don't want my
life,
quality of life. I don't want my kid dying of a heart attack at 60 because I let him think that that's okay.
Well, with all of these, and we've hit this point before, if you kind of have dominion and you lead your family in one of these areas really, really poorly, what does that probably say about the others? Very rarely is somebody, just doing a terrible job of leading their family on the intellectual or the physical level. But man, they're doing a robust job of this on the spiritual level.
Right.
Maybe 1 in a million.
Right.
Odds are you need to have all of these things lined up. You need to have all of these things nailed down of I'm leading my family in each one of these areas, because if one starts to slip and you start to struggle on the physical side, is it less important than the spiritual? Of course.
Sure.
We will grant you that. There is no denying that it matters way more that your kids are faithful Christians than their fitness or the food they eat, of course. However, start there as far as make sure that I shouldn't say start there, start with the spiritual. But what I mean is go to the physical next. Make that something that you prioritize healthy. The other thing I would say is good entertainment choices. You could say that doesn't really fall into the spiritual category. It very much falls into the physical category. Are you leading your family to not be addicted to their phones?
Right.
Are you leading your family to not be addicted to all kinds of immoral entertainment choices?
To TikTok, to Instagram,
to just be people who watch TV all day or play video games all day. Are you leading? Again, people might think, that's kind of secondary. It matters. Are you leading your family in the proper direction when it comes to entertainment, health, all these things?
Because here's what you have to think about. And my wife and I have this conversation a lot with our kids. I got a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and almost a 1-year-old. You're raising them to be adults.
Yeah.
We can't look at it as I'm raising a little 4-year-old. I am, but ultimately I'm raising him to be an adult that is going to take care of himself and take care of a family one day, and he's going to answer to God one day. And the way that I raise him does matter in terms of his adulthood.
Yeah.
It's not that, I raise him up to 18 and then poof, he gets to be his own man. Everything that I've done up to that point has set him on a course, good, bad, or otherwise. When we're thinking about the physical health, and I would encourage you to think about this. You have kids. What do I want my kid to be at 30? Do I want him to be an overweight slob who doesn't pick up things, who's addicted
Joe,
to his phone?
That doesn't matter. All that matters is the spiritual
As long
side.
as he's going to church. No.
It's not true.
I don't want him to be a loser. I don't. I'm just going to say it. I don't want my kid to be a loser. And that starts by me thinking at 4. No, not that Harrison's a loser at 4. Not at all. It starts with me getting him in a position and me taking care of the things now so he's ready at 30 years old to lead a family, to do the same exact thing, and to continue good cycles, because these cycles will go generationally. If I accept overweight, slob, like I don't take care of myself, I don't take care of my health, I'm addicted to all of these things, what do I think he's going to do? And his next generation and next generation. Somebody's going to have to break the curse that I started.
You set the tone as the father. The other area of this, and then we'll move on, is the the idea of hard work that we've already had a
Right.
couple episodes on. Man, you lead your family in that area. You show your family. You lead your family. We're going to be a family of hard workers. We're
right.
not going to be a family of lazy couch potatoes who, again, just watch TV all day.
Right.
We're going to be hard workers. We're going to be people that other people look at, not for you to boast or be overly prideful about, but that other people look at and say, that's a hardworking
Yeah,
kid.
they get it done.
They get it done. That person works hard. They got a really good work ethic. So much of these things, I'm glad you brought up the 30-year thing of like, what do you want your kid to be in 30 years? So much of these things, and I'll let you get into the intellectual side, requires vision.
Yeah,
Vision
no
for
doubt.
the future. Vision for where you want your family
That's
to
leadership.
be. That's leadership. It's not just day by day. Well, let's just see what the day holds, right? Let's just get through today. That is not going to be an effective leader if all you're focused on is, let me just get through this day, get through this week. No, it needs to be, where do I want my family to be? Like you said, in 30 years, what do I want my kids to look like in 30
right.
years? That is so important. That is so crucial for the father's role.
And it starts today. It starts with the decisions we make today. But yes, we have to have it planned out. And no, it doesn't mean that, we're not talking James 4, our life is a vapor. We're talking about the man who doesn't count the cost as he goes out to war. Like,
Right.
you
I
gotta
guess
think
I'll have a
two-
family,
Right, exactly. You got to think 2 steps ahead about this because you will answer to God on Judgment
Which
Day.
is why an episode like this, if you're only 15, matters.
Yeah,
Even though
that's
you might
exactly
not
it.
get married for 6 more years, this is super important right now because
right.
it's about that vision.
So number 2, that's physical. Number 2 is intellectual. How do we lead our family intellectually? And I'm actually going to turn it over to you for this as we consider, again, the domains of life. What do I mean by leading intellectually?
Well, and again, we're going to end with spiritual because that is the most important.
Right.
We do not deny that.
Right.
That is something that God is going to care most about. Were you faithful to God? Did your family reflect Christ? Were you pursuing Christ?
Right.
We're saving that for the end. That's the last thing we're going to hit on. For this intellectual point, man, make sure your kids are successful in school. Make sure your kids work hard in school. Make sure their academics are not something they view as, C's get degrees. I'll settle for the passing grade. High school's all about having fun. Whatever the current mindset is. Make sure your kids are pursuing greatness. Make sure your family is somebody who is intellectually, they're chasing intellectual or intellect as far as, I want to learn things. I want to be curious. I want to read books. Reading books is going it's going by the wayside. People don't read much anymore. Adults make fun of reading these days, and that's the most pitiful thing to me. But you lead your family in intellectual fashion where you're well read. You kind of know your way around stuff. Not to boast, as we've said before, not to be arrogant, but this is one is important as well.
Yeah. Well, I would say, to boast, I'll boast for you. You are incredibly well read, and we're as a kid, and my wife is the same way. You guys read a lot of the classics.
Sure.
You were reading all the time growing up. I mean, by the time Will was 9, he'd read more books than I think I've currently read in my life.
Some of those were Magic Treehouse and the Hardy Boys.
That's all right. That's all right. It was a lot of reading. And from the intellectual point of view, I want my kid to be articulate. I want him to communicate well. We talked about that last episode. Go check that one out if you haven't seen it. I want him to be articulate, and I want him to be well-rounded as an individual. And that's the intellectual. My mom had this idea of like, I think I may have mentioned before, but she said, we're going to go to a symphony, an opera, a play, and like a, Broadway show or whatever. And what was a ballet. And
Oof.
dude,
Oh, man.
dude,
That's unfortunate.
it was rough. And my brother and I were making a lot of jokes that we probably shouldn't have been making regarding the tights and the costumes they were wearing while we were doing it. And we were getting some dirty looks from my sisters. It's neither here nor there.
They loved it, I'm sure.
I'm sure. Yeah, that's me being well-rounded there. But hey, my mom really wanted us to be cultured. She wanted us to intellectually know what we're talking about. She wanted us to know how to use when you go and you're sitting, she always said, I want you to be able to be entertained by the president, to go to the White House and know what you're doing, what forks you use, things like that. That may sound trivial, it may sound dumb, but when we're talking about the intellectual, you have a duty to lead your family where they can accomplish amazing things because they're well read. And those dads that are kind of like, well, I'm just proud of my kids because they did their best.
They did their best.
Right.
Oh, man.
It's one thing if maybe your kid really did his best, he just doesn't understand something. Okay, that's that. But how many of those dads are saying that because they don't really want to have to push the kid to say, I know you can be better. I know you can be better. We're going to sit down and figure out how. And you see this with like homeschool families. Drives me nuts that the dad allows the mom to kind of take the reins, and the mom's like, hey, we'll do it when we get up, 10 o'clock. We'll just do it in our PJs. And the kid comes out. The kid has no ability to go and function in life. He wants to go to college and can barely write a paper because he's never had to. That's not acceptable. Right. And you as the dad, that falls to you. Well, my wife's the one that did it. I don't care. Neither does God, nor does anybody else.
Yeah.
You're stunting your kid intellectually because you failed to lead them academically. That matters. When we're talking about leading a family, I want my kid in 30 years to be able to be a titan of industry. Like he's able to lead men on mass level because he's articulate, he's well-read, he understands who he is. That starts today.
Now, again, I 100% agree with all that. That's the way that I plan to raise my kids. I think it goes without saying, and I love that phrase because people say that and then they say it. So it's like, why did you say it goes without saying? But I will use that phrase. It goes without saying. This can be taken a little bit too far in a lot of cases,
Sure.
I think. I've seen personally parents who they really, really want their kids to be super well-rounded, which is not a bad thing. But what is that at the expense of? Their relationship with God, their
No
faith.
doubt. No doubt.
They're more well-rounded with the musical instruments they play and the experiences they have and the books they've read than they are in God's word.
Right.
That's not great. That's not something that's going to get you very far when it comes to spiritually, which is again what we're going to end with. So be careful with this. Is really important, but I'd say be careful.
Let me also say this, because this goes with the other physical and intellectual. Do not vicariously live through your kids.
Yeah.
I push them so much academically because I really want them to go to Harvard. Why do you want them to go to
Because
Harvard?
it reflects good on you.
Exactly. Is that for you or is that for them? We're talking about doing what's best for the kid. You call your son to be the best he can be because I want him to be the best he can be. Not the best I think he should be. Not, following the path that I have structured for him that he needs to follow.
Right.
No, don't live vicariously through your kids. Call them up to their own high standard because you know this is what's best for you, not for me. So just be aware of it, and I like that caution as well.
That's a great point. Let's get to the third one, which is the emotional. We
Yep.
talked about physical, we've talked about intellectual. Now we're at the emotional side of things. You lead your family emotionally, and I would say the first part of that is that you lead your family to be able to A, understand their emotions, B, express their emotions, and I guess similar to that would be what we talked about last week, communicating your emotions, being able to articulate it. And what is that going to lead to? Your kids are probably pretty good at relationships,
Right?
Not just boyfriend, girlfriend, marriage stuff.
That's right.
Friendships. They are good at relationships. You have a good relationship with them. They have a good relationship with their siblings.
That's right.
All of that is you emotionally leading your family. If you're the dad that never wants to talk about anything emotional and just really kind of bottles that up, and your family never expresses, never communicates anything about emotion, that is going to be a dysfunctional family. You can book it.
That's right. You come home, you turn on the TV, you kind of zone out.
Unplug. Yeah.
You unplug and you realize, like, instead of the family dinners being important, talking about the day, talking about the things that matter to you, well, hey, that's fine. I just need my time to kind of unplug.
I've had a long day at work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And what that communicates is the relationship can wait. The communicating with you can wait until I'm in the appropriate headspace. And what that looks like may differ.
I'll just say, maybe you're watching this and your dad fits that bill of somebody who, man, the recliner was his go-to spot every single night. I'm sorry for that. That's something that is, unfortunate. And I know a lot of young people, young men have that as an example for their dad.
Right.
That's something that we just want to encourage you, break that cycle. Don't be that dad that is emotionally unavailable for their kid. Don't be the dad that is, again, soon as they get home, maybe, hey, how was your day? Let's get some food. And then he's watching the World Series or whatever it is. Man, be emotionally available for your kids because that's something that will set them up for so much success in
Big time.
life.
Attachment matters. Attachment really, really matters. I can tell you from a therapist perspective, a lot of guys come to see me with porn problems and with all sorts of problems. And I'll ask, hey, how's your relationship with your dad? And they say non-existent.
Yeah.
I didn't ever talk to my dad. So your dad never talked to you about any of these things? No. And if anything, my dad shamed me. Like, those are really the role that you play as a father. And we're going to have a full episode on this, so I don't want to go too deep into it at all. But it has so much of an effect on your kids. And so I like what you said. You have the unique ability to help your kids be really good at relationships. And so, again, real fast, attachment perspective-wise, your relationship with yourself is often determined, if you are a male, is often determined by your relationship with your dad. If you're really hard on yourself, chances are your dad is really hard on you. Things like that matter. And so just be cognizant of that as a dad when you go to lead the family. The way I treat my son may very well be how he treats himself
Right.
going into the future. And that's really heavy. I mean, that's a big deal.
We haven't brought up very many specific Bible verses in this episode, obviously talking a lot of biblical principles here. One that I would bring up is Ephesians 6, verse 4. Obviously, verses 1 and 2, children, obey your parents, and the Lord for this is right. We discussed that 3 episodes ago now. Don't disrespect your parents. Episode 16. I think that's right. Yeah, anyway.
Sounds right.
Talking to kids. verse 4 specifically, what does Paul tell the Ephesians? And you fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath. And I've brought this up before, and I'm sure a lot of other people have too. Why didn't Paul say, and you parents? Why didn't he say, and you fathers and mothers?
Right.
He said, and you fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath. And the reason for that is because there is, to me, no debating this fact. Fathers have the most sway, control, and influence about whether their kid remains a Christian or chooses not to be a Christian. A father has the most sway on whether or not a child chooses to reject the faith and run away from the faith, but he also, the other side, has the most sway and influence on whether or not his kid is a faithful warrior for Christ. That's why Paul did not say, and you parents or and you mothers, and fathers.
That's a great point.
Because fathers are the single most influential factor. Paul knew that. Obviously, Paul is inspired of God. God knows that.
Right.
That's why this is a big deal.
That's right. Moms have they play a pivotal role in the first 5 to 10 years of a kid's life.
Their development.
Their development and all of that. Their love, a lot of the relationship is developed at that point. But what we know is right around 10, especially for young men, right around 10 up to when they leave the house, that's like the dad's time to shine, man. And he has the ability, it's a make or break thing. And he can provoke his kids to wrath, or he can lead his kids amazingly and courageously and into a lot of different areas. And we have to make sure we're ready to take up that mantle. We have to make sure we're ready to lead them emotionally and I'm going to use that as a segue to get us into the last part, spiritually. We have to be able to lead them in the most important way, which is spiritual. And we say, well, lead them to what? Of course, we're leading them to heaven, which is true.
That's what I wanted you to speak to. So I talked about how culture kind of has this idea of what leading a family is that is way off biblically. Sure. I want you to speak to, how does the church view being a spiritual leader versus what we believe the Bible teaches about actually being a spiritual leader?
Can you get your kids to show up to church? Can you get them to heaven? And those are really the two things. If your kid gets to heaven, hey, you accomplish your job. Now, it doesn't matter if your kid, barely showed up to church the entire time, but showed up just enough to kind of be spiritual and get to heaven. We're talking about strive for greatness, creating warriors, as we've talked about, and we're not just leading them toward heaven, we're leading them toward holiness. And I think that's a key distinguishing difference in how we lead our families, is we lead them to be the best they can be while on earth, being holy. Because if you're holy now, and if you enjoy God's presence now, and you enjoy being like Christ now, heaven is for you. If not, and if it's just a matter of check the boxes until I can get the reward at the end, you've missed the entire point of Christianity, and that's not great leadership if that's what we're calling our kids to.
The perfect example of this, of what you're speaking to about, and what I prompted you on, which is what the church views about being a spiritual leader, is the dad gets his daughter to church, but doesn't care what his daughter's wearing to church.
That's right.
That's a problem. The dad gets his son to the youth group event or to the church building, but doesn't care that he's on his phone the whole time and not really paying attention to the sermon. That's, again, the bar has been set at get them to church, as long as they're faithful under your roof, they're 18, you did a good job as a dad. We disagree. Being a spiritual leader is so much more than that. Again, it's going beyond did they show up to church. It's, hey, what is their relationship with God like? That's a lot of that comes from you and your teaching and your development. Hey, how do they, what is their understanding of God's word? What's their Bible knowledge? What are all of these things? Have you prepared them to be not just a well-adjusted adult, but a faithful Christian?
That's right.
Proverbs 22:6 is another one that we brought up before. Train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. I personally, and I've had discussions with a lot of people, my wife is one of them, a close friend of mine is one of them, that kind of were of the opinion that, hey, a lot of your adult decisions are pretty much on you and it's all you, which to some extent is true. You're responsible for your own actions. But I personally hold parents so responsible, probably more than most, for what your kids turn out to be, because they're the ones that were responsible for their development for the first 18 years of their life. That's why I said this is such a burden and responsibility on you, because if you choose to have kids after you get married, and hopefully you do, that is something that you're responsible to train them up in the way that they should go. And if they depart from the faith, what does that probably mean? Probably means you didn't train them up in the way they should go.
It's the nature versus nurture argument, which is huge in psychology. I'm way more on the nurture end,
side,
which is what you're talking. I mean, I think the way we raise as parents, attachment and everything else, that determines so much. And that's why this is so important. And as you alluded to, we hope you have kids. We're going to get into that in the raising children episode. We don't want to go too much into it. We want to get into why that's important. So that'll be coming, why it's important to have kids. But when you do, we have to be able to lead them to a closer walk with God.
Yes.
That's the big part of this leading. We're leading them not just to heaven, but we're leading them to greater holiness, and we're leading them to a closer walk with God. And so here's really where we come down to it. This is the kicker. You go, man, I don't have a family. This is good information.
That's so far off.
You're talking, Joe, that's probably a decade. Okay, that's all right. That's all right. But here's the thing. You can't give what you don't have. And what I mean by that is, how in the world are you going to impart a closer walk with God if you don't pick up your Bible?
Yeah.
If you don't pray? How are you going to teach your kids all about health when all you do is eat junk food and you're gaining weight?
How are you
going to
lead your kids intellectually when you
don't ever pick up a book? Exactly, you never pick up a book.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. How are you going to lead your kids emotionally when you don't talk to anybody?
Yes.
You're socially awkward and you never want to break out of it. You can't give what you don't have. That's why this matters to the 15, 16, 17-year-old who's looking at this saying, man, that's not where I am. It starts today. It starts with you being the man that you want to be, because what can you pass down to your kids? You will pass down something. And it can either be all of your bad habits and all the things that you don't want. Hey, do as I say, not as I do. Nobody wants to lead that way. And let's be honest, it doesn't work. Because kids can look at it and go, well, yeah, Dad said the right things, but you know what that makes you? It makes you a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Well, you need to, hey, make sure that you're, giving your best in school. Meanwhile, while you're in school, you're pulling C's and D's and you're okay with it, whatever it is. That's not good. So I'm not saying that's all kids or not all guys that are watching this, but we're calling you to the high standard because we want you to be able to be the type of guy that your kid looks up to, and whether you are saying it or not, he looks at you and goes, man, that's who I want to be.
Exactly right. And we're still learning this as we go.
That's right.
Obviously.
We're young dads.
Yes, very young dads. Joe has been doing it 4 or 5 years longer than me. You got married in 2016. I got married in 19, so I guess 3 years longer than me. We're new at this. We're not experts, but these are things that we have seen. These are things that we saw our parents do. And we just want to encourage you so much about leading a family is one of the most important things you will ever do as a man, as a godly young man. Treat that with the gravity and the importance that it deserves and that it merits. It's one of those things, we say this a lot. Find somebody in your life, and if hopefully it's your dad, but if it's not, find somebody else at your church that you look at and you say they lead their family well, or they did lead their family really well. Their kids are faithful Christians. He adores his wife and is a great husband. Man, talk to that person. Find out, hey, what can you tell me? Well, what can I do now? What can I learn from you?
Yeah.
Because it's so important. Don't let culture tell you that being a dad is working 40 hours a week and sitting in your recliner at night. That's not what leading your family is.
Yeah.
And so this has been a heavier episode. This has been a important episode, I would say. So we want to end it with something that's a little more lighthearted. If you are not a Star Wars fan, feel free to close out of this video now. Thanks for watching all those things. We really enjoyed, or we appreciate your attention. If you are, though, we are 2 days away from May the 4th. May the 4th be with you, is the big thing. We're Star Wars guys. It's funny. We talked, what was it, last episode about don't talk about things people don't care about.
Everybody cares about Star Wars.
Star
Come
Wars
on,
is one of those
it's
things.
Star Wars.
It's, people might think, it's nerdy. If you've ever watched it, it's really cool.
Yeah.
I grew up on it. I think it's great. You did as well.
Oh, yeah.
And so, little debate here. Me and Joe disagree strongly about which three. I'm gonna ask you what your favorite is. It better not be the most overrated one. But I'm a prequels guy. I like 1 through 3 the best. Obviously, 4, 5, and 6 have the originality. They have the nostalgia that everybody adores. I think 1 through 3 is the best. Present your case and tell me what your favorite
7
is.
through 9 doesn't exist.
I'll tell you why you're wrong.
At least it shouldn't exist.
Yeah, those most recent ones are brutal.
Those don't count in Star Wars canon as far as
Episode
I'm concerned.
8 is the worst Star Wars by far.
It's one of the worst movies by far.
Yeah,
but don't get me started. My favorite movie or favorite of the
Favorite of the Star
3?
Wars movies.
Okay. I'd have to say number 5.
No,
I know,
on,
I know you don't like it, and I know which one you're gonna choose.
That's what everybody says.
I think number 5. It's got
Empire
the most
Strikes Back.
Empire Strikes Back. The emotional. It's got the emotional gravitas, the weight to it. Even though the bad guy wins, there's still kind of hope toward the back end a little bit. It's one of those that's like you could go in and the good guys could have won and it could have ended the whole saga, or after 2 movies, or it could like really present this challenge, and it's got the greatest twist in movie history, of course. And
that I'll grant you. Yeah.
And so I think for that reason, the script is great. Every part of it's great. It moves. It's got good pace. Yeah, I think episode 5.
And I think episode 5 is so overrated. Episode 5 is good. It's probably top 3 or 4. But man, the people that say people have that as like a top 15 movie ever. That's ridiculous.
Oh, I think it might be.
Oh my goodness, the Dagobah scene is way too long.
Okay, I'll grant you that. I'll grant you that.
It's like you can't have that much dead time.
I know
it's important, but man, brutal. Episode 3 is to me the best. I love it. Revenge of the
Natalie
Sith.
Portman's acting is the equivalent of the Dagobah scene. Like,
Yeah,
what-
and Mark
what?
Hamill and Carrie Fisher were amazing at acting.
Well,
Come
hey,
on,
hey.
they were just as bad at acting as Natalie Portman. Don't give me that. Give me a break. Episode
got the
3, the
radio
way they
support.
tie it together, they've been building
It is a great
episodes 1 and
episode,
2, and you
a
get
great
to see Anakin go from the Chosen One, this great guy, this awesome Jedi, to he is Darth Vader. So cool. The culmination of the Mustafar fight scene. Oh, you just can't beat episode 3.
Best lightsaber battle. I will give you that. I think number 3 is a really good movie. We were there at the midnight showing.
I'm so
and
jealous.
People,
An experience I didn't have.
Man, I'm
Yeah.
telling you what, we were first in line too. It was on a Wednesday night. I still remember it. Right after church, we ran over, got giant drinks. We waited in line, and we had a guy with us who brought a big boombox and blasted episode 1 soundtrack for literally 4 straight hours.
Oh, that's
By the
brutal.
time I got in, it's like, please stop.
Yeah.
Great movie though. It was. So I will say that's a top 3. I just don't.
You gotta give it top 2. That's gotta be your second. Come on.
That's a tough one. That's a
Yeah,
tough one.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, New Hope's really good, and maybe number 2.
No way, it's better.
Maybe number
New
2.
Hope's better. But
But,
yeah, I mean, hey, comment.
I was gonna
know
say, let us know what's the best Star Wars.
Not everybody's gonna be Star Wars people here, but if you are, I know you have. That's one thing about Star Wars fans; they're so opinionated.
If you
that's
say
okay.
7, 8, or 9, we will call you out on the podcast.
That's right. Next week we will call you out.
And it will be violent. No, it's. I'll try to
They're
relax.
not great.
I'll try
They're
to
not
relax,
great.
but they're not great.
I'm not
movies.
as passionate about it as Joe because hey, at least it's Star Wars. 8 is horrible, but
Man,
7 and 9.
9 might even be worse.
Yeah,
But either way, yes, comment. Let us know what's the best Star Wars. May the 4th be with you. In 2 days at least.
Exactly.
And yeah, we appreciate you watching. Anything else?
Nope. This has been episode 18 of the Gem Podcast. Join us next week for episode 19.
right.